right, we're ready. All right, I want to welcome those of you who are joining us via Facebook Live, as well as those who are here in person. Our Skill Builder panel. Mentoring has been one of our recurring themes this year in our Skill Builders, talking about how do we invest ourselves in the lives of emerging ministry leaders around us. Maybe someone who's been called but lacks experience, maybe somebody who's investigating a call, maybe somebody who just shows a knack, an ability in an area of ministry and exploring what God is going to do with that in their lives. So how we invest in these folks and create on-ramps for them to be able to get a hands-on experience is something we've been talking about all year. I asked this particular panel to think about sort of things they do in their everyday practices. These may or may not be formal mentorships or anything, but just things they do day in and day out to help make mentoring, raising up emerging leaders, a part of their everyday practices. Let me introduce the panel. Cody Whitfield here in the middle is lead pastor of River Valley Christian Fellowship in Bastrop. He is the one and only pastor they've ever had. Cody, how long have you been at River Valley now?
This summer will be 15 years.
15 years, all right. So Cody has experience in a church planting environment with mentoring. He's led his he's led through that. He also does a lot of coaching with church planters around the country. So Cody brings that perspective to our discussion today about mentoring. Wayne Dillon, over there on the other end, is the director of Baptist Student Ministries at Texas State. Wayne, how long have you been there, and then how long have you been in Baptist Student Ministries overall?
Texas State, 11 years. BSM director, 28 years.
28 years. And so a big part of that, obviously, is mentoring, guiding young leaders, college students, and those who are right after college who are working with you. And so Wayne brings a long perspective dealing with those folks and mentoring, coaching, and guiding them. So Wayne, thanks for being part of the panel today. Jason Purcell is the worship pastor at Solid Rock Church here in San Marcos, and you've been in that capacity since?
2016.
2016. Jason also has extensive experience in the business world. He's somewhat of a serial entrepreneur, as well as a part of a family business that he helps to manage. And so Jason brings that perspective of worship leading, which involves lots of volunteers, lots of moving parts, lots of coaching, as well as secular experience. So we have a great panel today. Principles or philosophies that you follow that guide your overall approach. Those emerging leaders in your sphere of influence. And Wayne, since you're holding the microphone, you get to go first.
I knew that was coming, so I was welcoming the opportunity to play off what they said. I'll have to do that.
You get the
ahead of time. So the first thing that I would say is just something that students hear me say over and over and over all the time. And so at first I didn't think of it, and I thought, that's the obvious thing. Leadership is about who you are. In place, and then you're out of it. If you're a leader, you're a leader. Like, as far as in relation to what God is calling us to do. And so for a college student, that means you don't just check out and sit in the back and act like an out-of-touch freshman. A lot of people who get deceived into thinking you might discover not so much. Every person God talk to students about being a leader. Because I've known ministry leaders who, when and then I wrote down a third thing. What was it? But I think it's important. BSM director, which a renewal of a sense of calling, and that collegiate ministry is not ministering parents and doctors of the person. So we're just and we're training leaders for the church, Big C.
Yeah, so I have two, and I tried to craft my thing. So I think for pastors, is you can't. Coaching, we use the word coaching, or the language coaching. Mentoring a child. It's
Like Charlie Brown's
yes,
teacher?
Yes, yes. Raising up leaders. So if you're teaching, it needs to be teaching towards a skill, teaching towards something. And so one of the best ways to do that is to remember, don't talk so much. Be quiet. Don't. In those skills of actually doing what you're talking about, teaching them to do. You're teaching your youth guy to preach on Sunday or to preach on Wednesday. Common knowledge and consistent application. I love that quote because it's. I don't know that I'm going to teach you as much profound. I've coached Dustin stuff. I don't think he's ever gone. That I've never heard that before. In fact, he's probably been like, "You stole that from Rick Warren," And there's a lot of truth to that. But how can we get you to actually do that? How can we coach you through that process? And that's what we're talking about today. So,
good deal, Jason. 2 or 3 practices or philosophies that guide your work with those who are in your sphere of influence that you have a mentoring or coaching relationship.
Yes, sir. So y'all will hear this a lot from me, and I'll start out with identify and develop their giftings. I learned this first in the business.
I mean, not the ones you want them to have.
Exactly. I always see people, and I've got somebody in guitar and music theory down his throat, but he's called to be a youth pastor. So I mentor him on what he's called to do and what his giftings are, rather than what I want from him. And so that's the first thing. Identify who God is calling them to be. Second foundational point, focus on the why and adapt to that. Or Bill likes to preach a sermon. And if that doesn't work for the person we're mentoring, we should be able to adapt to their how. but I'm not called to do that. It doesn't work for me. So if some they're going to get frustrated and fail because maybe they're not called to do them in the adapt to the how we get it done. And lastly, always learning, and if you've accomplished just from day one, see that
skill or a lifetime, not as a
Lifetime
destination,
learning.
something
Exactly.
to achieve. Okay, good. Them to have real responsibilities, to get real hands-on experience. Repercussions not only for them, but in the church or in the ministry that they're a part of. So how do you give them ministry or the emerging leader himself or herself at an undue risk of failure? In other words, you want to but also kind of that protector role that you have as a minister. So Jason, I'll let you tackle that one first.
absolutely. Again, I think we should start with the mindset, and we should define failure. Excuse me. For some of us, we can define failure as things that aren't actually failure. Oopsies, mistakes. Ministry's messy. We know that it's messy. Let people get messy. But what's the real failure? We want to keep them from things that would hurt people's spirit or that would actually damage their career progression or something like that. But on things that might make us mistakes. So that would be the first one. Let's define failure first in our own minds before we even begin talking to the people that we're mentoring, so that we have a great freedom to allow them to make mistakes, but they're not considered failures. The second part is to remember that we appear, especially on things when we're letting them interface with the church or the public or something like that, we appear more real when people see our mistakes. So let's not be afraid of those things that might make us look stupid, or, when our entire sound system goes down on a Sunday and we're like, man, I know you can't hear me, and everybody's laughing. They're laughing because that's life, and now we seem real. It actually endears people to us. So part of that defining the failure, remember that we're real people, and people actually, when they see us have oopsies or failures or mistakes, it endures them to us.
Jason, let me interrupt you real quick there. That reminds me of something that I learned at an early age, and that is that a big part of mentoring or coaching is when that person, that emerging leader, gets to see you, how you're still mentoring because they're still watching. Yeah.
Right, and so you have to Is anybody hurt? Is everybody okay? That are not known can only breed frustration. Director started yelling about somebody cupping their hands. It's like that. I had never heard that expectation. Very clear and very definitive about.
Great word. Cody, some ways that you approach some of the downsides that could happen.
Sure, and I want to build just right there because you stole half my answer. The way I phrased it was coaching on the front end is much more effective than critique on the back end. And so that's what you're talking about with expectations. And so, but we don't do this well as busy leaders. Because if we have a staff, especially a staff member, someone who's, we just throw it on them, but it takes some time when you've been doing something so long that you just sort of know how to do it. It takes some time to be able to back up and say, okay, what are the actual steps in this? What are the actual rights and wrongs and do's and don'ts? How can I truly define what I want from you so that you know the box? And then also, how can I coach you to be successful on the front end so that I can almost guarantee you're going to do well on the back end versus on the back end going, hey, just like you were saying, you preach 45 minutes and we preach 30 around here. Well, he didn't know that, or whatever it is. Let's talk to him on the front end. And then one of my sayings that I use is the best way to raise up leaders is to leave. Well enough that, if they don't follow that, then we've got a whole different set of issues. But leave, take a Sunday off and let your youth. Five text messages at 12:15 going, whoa, It's a wonderful, it's fun at that point. It's a lot of fun to coach them through that, and they're going to succeed before they ever go into the battle.
So get out of the way often enough for them to really have a chance to do it. Deal with this aspect of mentoring, that giving the person enough responsibility so that they're really learning, but also helping protect them from
is what I was going to say, that a lot of times, especially early on, I think depending on where people come from culturally with their church background, for us, some people see failure as we thought 50 people were going to be there and 20 people were there, and it's a failure.
Right.
And so eliminating that numerical sense of because that creates this almost toxic ministry setting where you're having an event and the leaders people that are being ministered to because there are not enough of them. So it's not worthy of their attention or something.
Man, yeah.
I mean, I've had small group leaders that come back and they're like, only 2 people showed up for the small group. And so they feel like a failure. And then we start talking about what the discussion happened. And, one of the 2 wasn't a believer and the gospel was shared. And it's like, how can you conceive that that's a failure? So I think that a lot of times the notion, and I know I'm echoing what these guys have said, but a lot of times the notion of different directions on what that is, and it seems to me that most of the time, if it hasn't been clearly defined for them, what they decide is failure is not at all what I think failure would be.
It might be disappointment.
So,
it might be expectations were different, but it's not failure.
Right, exactly. And then the second thing I would say that's similar to it is that if we don't learn anything, then we failed at whatever it was. So, something could be a big flop as an event or something could happen. But I think that it's a couple of steps away, and it's not the first thing that you can do, but the best thing that actually helps in this, in my experience, is if they're not just taking my word for it, but there's somebody else that they're following in somebody else's footsteps. Like in the way that we do things and in the way that all churches that I've been a part of have done things, and probably you guys, there's somebody else that has gone down that path ahead of them a lot of times, and now they're asking to lead something that's similar, if not the same thing that someone else has led. And if that someone else can also be involved as more of a peer who's just a few steps ahead of them, and they can follow in those footsteps, then that's that's setting them up for confidence, first of all, and then setting them up for having a different perspective, because and maybe for me, I guess a lot of with a lot of baggage, kind of necessarily. It can be good baggage if that's a thing, but but sometimes there can be this like things that make the communication stilted because they have certain expectations of how I would react to something that has nothing to do with me. It's actually somebody else. And now we're in some kind of psychology or counseling session, so I apologize. I'm not in my depth on that, but when it especially comes to failure and am I a failure and those kind of questions, those are some kind of things that the coaching on the front end really has to be with a knowledge of who they are in Christ and what that means, and not just as if they're a puzzle piece to try to, or a piece of a machine to try to make something happen.
You're mentoring a person, not a robot,
Not a cog in the
a
wheel.
functionary. Yeah.
And then the other thing that I said that I'll introduce with this, and it's also part of my answer to the next question, which I'm probably going to have to answer first because I have the microphone.
No, we'll let
is that-
Cody go first.
Yeah, we can? Okay. Oh, thanks. So is that we base a lot of what we do on one-on-one discipleship. And so most of these things are handled in one-on-one conversations. And so the discipleship with a leader has to do also with what they're leading, who else is involved, how they're recruiting a team, what they're planning that's coming up, and all of that. And those things get bounced back and forth both before something. There's built-in sense of like preparing for it and then getting feedback afterwards, and on a low-key one-on-one kind of level, rather than a get called out to make a report in a group kind of level.
Yeah.
And I don't, and I always think that that's best to have that, as well as to have a group accountability with a leadership team or something like that. But that's not the only place that it goes and that it comes up.
Good.
That's good.
All right, so part of mentoring at times is delivering a rebuke or a correction, or coaching them out of some kind of a mistake, or something that could even be a character issue that has to be addressed. So what have you found to be the best way or ways to deliver a rebuke or a correction in a mentoring or coaching kind of relationship? Cody?
So, fully transparent, I was horrible at this early in my ministry. True. I almost never did it. I was the consummate encourager, and then never, hey, you really stunk it up on that one. Even when I went home and kicked the dog and griped to my wife.
They got the rebuke.
Yes,
instead of-
no, yes, yeah.
Poor dog.
And so I really was, and that was about me and fear and a lot of things that I had to work through. So I hope that encourages you, because you can learn to do any of these things.
That's good.
It's not like you're, JK was probably born with a rebuke. He learned it early in the Navy. All right, so what? But I did not, and so the answer that I have now is as quickly as you can from when it happens, and in the context of when it happens. Two things. So, in other words, if you say something that we don't say at River Valley, my tendency is to want to pull you aside and go, hey, we don't say that. But if I've said that already to that person, then they said it in the group, then I have to do that in the group. We don't say that here. That's not how, and they need to hear that. Like, Jesus told Peter, get behind me, Satan, in the group context. So it needs to happen within whatever context it happens. And also, quickly, I have a tendency, what are they going to do? All of us have like at least one cantankerous deacon or staff member or whatever that we know, and we fight over it and the wording, and we do it in our minds, and go get it done. Get it. I mean, go and talk to them. And by the grace of God, I've gotten better at that. Melinda, when she knows I'm going to do that, my dad's name is Gary. And so she says, don't use the Gary voice. You have to do those things. So honestly, like transparency, I've coached a staff member recently on their preaching and how to do it for the crowd, not for their seminary professors that are teaching them. I've coached a staff member recently on some parenting issues that I've seen with them. It was uncomfortable for me, but needed to be addressed. I'm doing this, and I'm getting. I don't think I'm good. I think I'm proficient. But if it doesn't, it creates an unhealthy culture of we're awesome, and as opposed to no, God's great and He uses us.
We can learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Jason.
Most real failures or mistakes come from there being an expectation and the result, and there being a difference between the two. So going back to the last question, did we set the expectations correctly? That's the first thing to find out. Sit down with the person and go, here were the expectations. Did you not know them? Did I not lay them out well enough for you? So now that me and the person that I'm speaking to understand the expectations, and then we see the results, and there's a difference between the two, I say that we approach it Socratically. Actually Socratically, which means ask the questions that lead you from the result to the expectation and listen and desire their results. So I also put on here Socratically, not pseudo-Socratically. A lot of people, when they hear the word Socratic, they think of the American westernized Socratic method that's, I have a result, I'm going to ask you questions that are going to lead you, like in a courtroom, to my result and change your mind. If you read the dialogues, that's not what Socrates was doing. He was actually asking the person, what do you think about this? And let them lay out where they were at when they made that mistake, what their mindset was, what they were thinking the result would be, or what they were thinking the expectation would be. Don't assume that you know it. Don't assume that you're going to bring them somewhere, but figure out where that is and then begin to ask the questions of, let them help you figure out how to get from the result back to the expectation.
So you're helping them evaluate themselves essentially by asking questions.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because we're all humans, and they thought they were meeting some kind of expectation. They didn't do it. Most likely, if we've spent some time with them, if we've prepped them, if we've allowed them at our pulpit, we should know that they're not the type of person that was going up there as a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So why are they missing the mark? And we're truly asking them and letting them give us the information, and then maybe giving them extra information that they were missing, extra expectations that they were missing, or whatever will get them back to that expectation, but truly allowing them to lay out their mindset, their purposes that got them to the result, and then allowing them to get to that.
Good. Wayne, delivering a rebuke, best way to do that in your experience?
So there's definitely a lot of overlap here, and I'm still trying to adapt. I said it's kind of interesting the way that you started off, Cody. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I can learn from that. I'm trying to figure it out. So, one of the first things I said was one-on-one. So one-on-one does this, but he's saying that in the context and at the same environment and all of that. And what I usually would go for would be, well, there's also another thing that's kind of flowing through a lot of this for me that I haven't made a distinction with, and that is that the distinction between staff members and then student leaders, who are all volunteers. And I know that all of us in ministry have those kind of distinctions. And in our context, for a good number of years now, all of the staff members that we have had have been great student leaders who
have come through the system.
So that makes a distinction there too. But as soon as you flip that switch, as soon as they're a staff member, they get treated differently by their former peers, and then they are necessarily treated differently in some ways by the rest of the staff and all of that, and those things, leaving that aside so I don't just create a long answer that's kind of meaningless. What I had said was address it one-on-one and then ask them to address it back with the group if it was a public or to some extent public failure, which is a little bit different, but has some of the same principles of what you were saying. And also, I was just thinking through when are the times that I've actually been there to see what it was. See, most of the time, I'm hearing 3 different versions from people that all sound a little bit different, and then I've got to try to unpack it with the person, and then they're telling me something different, and then you get that thing of, go with 2 witnesses or go with, these kind of, how do those things develop? And so now I've said a lot, and I'm not sure if it's added to
Well, what I heard is
very
get your
much.
facts straight,
But,
first of all.
but yes, trying to
get your facts straight.
triangulate what's actually true. And then the other thing that I would say is if the culture can be such that they are corrected by their peers, like a phrase that young people use a lot now is "that's not okay." I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase. Hopefully not too familiar because people aren't saying it to you all the time. But
That would not be okay.
Right. So if that can happen in the context and somebody else can just call it out in the moment and it can be handled, and then later I can just hear that story, that's fabulous. So then that involves going back to the first question about leadership and making them feel empowered to do that, rather than something uncomfortable happens and everybody just looks down. So
We'll conclude this with 2 fill-in-the-blank statements, and I want you guys to fill in the blanks. When you have emerging leaders in your sphere of influence, you do make sure you do. Since you have the microphone, we'll let you go with that one.
okay, I got my notes. Be sure I know what I said. Whatever you do, don't call them a leader and not let them lead.
Wow.
I think that's something that I see in a lot of places, and I encounter people that have had that experience a lot. We used to joke with some staff members from a few years ago that in some organizations, being a leader means showing up 15 minutes before everybody else, but there's nothing else that you do other than maybe somebody asks you to move a chair or a table, and then you get called a leader, but then of them as a leader.
Which also means you have to do everything.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And then, one of the other ways of that happening is getting a leadership team as someone who's leading those people and then instructing them specifically of everything to do. And so as soon as you're not there, they're no longer a leader. And anyway.
So you've crippled them by not letting them actually lead. Yeah.
And then whatever you do, make sure you be yourself with them and let them be themselves, not try to be you. And this was like Jason said something like this in the answer, I think. Our image instead of the image of Christ. And that just sets them up for failure in all kinds of ways when they move on to anything else besides being in your shadow.
Good word. Cody, whatever you do, don't. And whatever you do, make sure you.
All right, so whatever you do, don't go into the ministry.
If you can do anything else.
Just don't do that, man.
Okay, but now God has you cornered. The bush is burning. You have to go to Egypt. What do you do now?
I thought of that cynically, and yeah. All right, so whatever you do, don't sacrifice the important. So I truly believe. So for me, I coach about 20. Having a great inner life. By that I mean spiritual life with Christ and emotional life with yourself. You can raise godly, wonderful children. You can plant and see a church that grows, that is dynamic and healthy, and you can do all of those things simultaneous. You can. It's in fact, you must. So you cannot sacrifice, and our tendency is going to be probably, especially for our church planners that are really busy on the front end, is to sacrifice a little bit of family, whatever that means for their family, in order to put a little bit more in the church. Don't do that.
Good.
Don't do that. It won't help the church as much as you think, and it will hurt your family more than you thought it would. So don't sacrifice the important. Whatever you do,
Communicate. As long as we keep talking, as long as we're in communication with each other, we'll figure this all out. And if, excuse me, if almost any of you remember your childhood and whoever mentored you to be who you are now, I guarantee you most of the communication that you received, most of the lessons you learned, were not them sitting you down across the desk and saying, let me teach you. It was when you were working together.
Yeah.
It was when you were hanging out and just having conversations. My son has learned more from me in just riding to school with Dad, or going out on a Saturday shopping with Dad, than he did with me sitting him down and going, son, listen. And the people we're mentoring are the same. They don't need us to lecture them. They need us to talk to them and to communicate with them. And the more they can observe us in our natural leadership state, the more God will grow them into theirs. Communicate.
All right, we have a couple of minutes left. Does anybody have a question or an observation or a comment you want to throw out? Good morning, Jason.
it's too early, dude.
Jason out. JK, you had a word?
Yes, sir.
Oh, Pastor Henry? Okay, yeah. Interpret for us.
Okay. Train or teach someone who is very motivated, and then later you notice that they've lost their interest and their motivation. What do you do?
Certainly that requires some investigation. You have to figure out what's going on there. Anybody want to respond to that on the panel?
there's a book by Ken Blanchard called Self-Leadership and the 1-Minute Manager, and it's got not only does this sometimes happen, it always happens. Everyone is highly motivated on the front end, but the reality of how hard of what they're trying to do is sets them back on the back end. So your job is to coach them through what they're doing, and people are motivated differently. Motivation, you're right on track.
We is getting people to start leading the thing. Sure, it's a responsibility. Backs off of what Cody was saying, and this is prayer, meditation on Scripture.
Both a comment and a question. Routine, incredible. To do what you do, investing
Become a priority part of your ministry.
And I didn't know any better. And then as I saw the fruit of it, I was just hooked on it.
No matter what job you have to pay the rent. thing as a full-time job and paying the rent. At the very beginning, I said mentoring towards coaching we're paying the rent. You're
So you need to stop doing something.
stop doing sermon prep as a church planner. Well, that's stupid. Too much else to
Can't
do.
afford it. Yeah.
Right. So spend 8 or what.
Can I give a short story that taught me this lesson?
If it's
2 minutes or less.
if it's 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Okay. 2012, we're in percent of my clients at our family business are Fox News, American Christian.
Now,
you know.
careful now. You might be preaching to the choir, so
Well,
be careful.
that's the point. Complaining and watching the news. And that year in October, Canyon Lake High School had Gay Pride Day with mandatory participation. Would have walked down to the school board, that would not have happened. The enemy tends to have us focus on things we have no control over. We have no responsibility because we have no accountability. And he's lives are the number one thing. My wife, my children, and my leaders that I'm developing, my
Areas of greatest leverage, to use
Exactly.
that financial terms, where you
Yes.
have the biggest impact. JK, did that address? And some not so.
And it was a great investment of time. And I didn't have much of a staff.
Golf course, too.
Yes, you can.
yes.
We learned. Yeah. Hey, I want to thank the panel. Let's give this panel an expression of appreciation. Thank you guys for being a part of this and for preparing so well. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for this room full of ministry leaders. Lord, I pray you'll bless them. I pray you will multiply them by giving them people they can invest themselves in. And Lord, I pray they'll make it a priority to men and women as they go back to their places of service, that they may serve and honor you in this area of mentoring. I pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, thanks for being